It's time for another episode of I Am Northwest Arkansas, the podcast covering the intersection of business, culture, entrepreneurship, and life in general here in the Ozarks. Whether you are considering a move to this area or trying to learn more about the place you call home, we've got something special for you. Here's our host, Randy Wilburn.
Hey folks, and welcome to another episode of I Am Northwest Arkansas. I'm your host, Randy Wilburn. I'm excited to be with you today. I have a special guest. He's not just a guest, he's also my neighbor. We actually live in the same subdivision, and I got to know Clint over the past few years in passing at our community pool, and that's a whole nother issue with the pool itself, because it's got its own personality, but nonetheless, Clint and his family live right down the street from me. He's also the pastor of Good Shepherd Lutheran Church, which is right there on Old Missouri, at the corner of Old Missouri and Rolling Hills. And, I got to say, Clint, for the longest time when I started this podcast, I wondered if I was going to even do anything in reference to kind of talking about the Bible Belt that we're in, right? Mm-hmm. We're like in the buckle of the Bible Belt here in Northwest Arkansas. And, a lot of people don't know this. As a former pastor myself in remission, so I understand that world and the faith-based world that is, and and I said, man, I don't know if I'm going to, because I'm trying not to turn anybody off. I want to make this podcast the widest audience possible, but I also said, I understand how important people's faith is to them, and whatever you are, whether you're Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, we all call, at least most of us call on a higher power for some guidance and some wisdom. And I just said, I think I do want to figure out a way to introduce that onto the podcast, because I'm sure people coming here to Northwest Arkansas would wonder what Christian life or church life, or what's going on down in this neck of the woods, and how do things happen, right? Because people have this idea that it's all Southern Baptist in Northwest Arkansas, and that couldn't be further from the truth. I mean, that's one faction. There are so many other churches. There's so many other organizations that are part of Northwest Arkansas, and I couldn't think of a better person to bring on the show than you. And so Clint's last name is Schnekloth, and it sounds like it's spelled. And Clint is originally, I believe, from Iowa.
Yep, grew up on a farm in Iowa.
Yeah, but he's been down here for several years, many more years than I have been, and I just wanted to have him on the show. So, Clint, how are you doing today?
Excellent. Yeah, it's fun to be here.
Good.
It's a beautiful day.
It is a beautiful day. It's a little warm, and I'm a little not hungover, but I'm a little tired after a trip to the CONCACAF Gold Cup up in Kansas City. And for those of you listening, 3 hours north of us, we have an amazing, that's Children's Mercy Park, which is where the FC Kansas plays, the football club that plays in the major soccer league here in the U.S. They have an amazing facility, and we went up there last night to watch 2 games. And I got to say, if you ever get the chance to head on up to Kansas City, a couple things you got to do. Obviously, you have to have barbecue. You've got to visit the World War I Museum.
Yes, the best museum in the Midwest.
I mean, it's amazing. Yeah. It's absolutely amazing. And then the third thing is that you've got to visit it's the Kansas Motor Speedway and the Children's Mercy Park, which is right next to each other. And then there's a huge, for all you shopping fans out there, there's a huge shopping center that abuts that campus there. So definitely check it out whenever you get a chance. It's just about 3.5 hours up the road. But anyway, I digress. I was on a long road trip that ended up being longer than I thought, and I got in early this morning. And so, but I'm glad to be here with you. So that's a long preamble to get us started. But how are you doing?
I'm good. Yeah, I did not stay up as late as you did last night, so I'm feeling pretty good.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. That's awesome. So tell us a little bit about yourself, Clint. I mean, you've been, every time I look up, I either see you on the news or I see you being quoted in the Northwest Democrat Gazette. I know you, so I've you're around, and you're a pastor, and I don't know how you do it all. You're involved with Canopy NWA. I'd love for you just to kind of tell us a little bit about your superhero origin story, how you ended up here in Northwest Arkansas, and just share with our audience a little.
Yeah. Well, we are still sometimes surprised that we ended up in Arkansas. I think that might be a common feeling of people who are from outside of the region. We moved here from Wisconsin, and in our denomination, you can put yourself, up for call and kind of paint with a broad stroke and see what comes up. And I got a call from the bishop down here who said, "Hey, would you be interested in interviewing in Arkansas?" And I was like, "What? No, thanks." And he's like, and he sent me the description of the congregation and said, just look at it, just read a little bit about it. And so I did, and it started getting under my skin a little bit, enough where about a month later I called back and I was like, okay, so if they're still interviewing down there, just throw my name in there. And
okay. So
then we flew down to Northwest Arkansas to interview. This is back in 2010, like the summer of 2010.
Wow. Okay.
And we flew into Fort Smith because there was a cheaper flight, and then drove up from Fort Smith. And we took the back way. We didn't take the interstate. We took the old
71.
71.
Yeah.
Just to see the countryside, which that was gorgeous. And I had no idea that there were, back mountain roads quite like that in this area.
That's how people used to get to the games from Central Arkansas back in the day.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It used to be like a really common way that everybody drove.
Could you imagine that?
Also, we were blown away. This is a very much an aside, but it's hilarious. I don't know if you've ever been in the men's restroom at the Fort Smith Airport.
Oh, I have.
It's like this award-winning bathroom.
The bathroom and the chairs.
Yes,
they have
the
these
chairs.
Barker Lounger chairs. They're really nice.
It kind of flipped us out. We were like, the airport is smaller than any airport I've been in, and yet they've got this bathroom that is robotics and porcelain. Well, anyway, so we drove up here, and I was immediately in love with the area just based on the drive, and then when you finally get to Fayetteville and you see the city, that was already a draw. But then we went back, and we accepted the call, and then I had to answer the question over and over again to people, neighbors and friends up in Wisconsin and Iowa of why Arkansas? Did you get in trouble?
Right.
It's
did you do something wrong?
Did you do something wrong?
Yeah.
Because Midwesterners really do have this kind of condescending attitude overall towards the South.
Right.
And I've never really had that in quite the same way. In fact, in some ways, I've always been drawn to the South. I'm definitely still an outsider enough that I can't say that I'm a Southerner or that I'm adopted totally into the culture, but I never had that as negative of a view. So I ended up I had to write an article I wrote it for our denominational magazine with the title "Why Arkansas," just to kind of answer that question and kind of challenge people to consider going outside of their comfortable areas. This church that I serve, they went without a pastor for 4 years.
Wow.
Because they had such a struggle getting people to even interview for a call here. Because Lutherans overall of my denomination are located in the upper Midwest and out east, Pennsylvania, New York, where all the Northern Europeans settled when they came to the United States.
Right.
So it's a move outside of that. I moved from a town that had 3 Lutheran churches, each with 2 Lutheran pastors, in a town of 10,000 people in Wisconsin, to Fayetteville, where there's one ELCA church, and I'm the only pastor there. Lutherans they migrate here from other places in the country. They didn't settle here to begin with. Well, that's also part of my story of coming here. I've always thought of myself as a missionary to a degree, and my wife and I served in Global Mission for a while. So for me, going to the edge of my denomination and kind of serving out there on the edge is not a stretch. It's actually what I like and want to do. Yeah. But then it's also opened up a whole bunch of opportunities, because instead of networking within my little Lutheran world, all of my work is connecting to, other denominations or other traditions.
Right.
And that's just really fun.
Yeah. Is that how Canopy NWA started, or did that predate you when you...
Oh, no, I started Canopy NWA together
did.
with a group of people. There's a fun story behind that. So this was the year, if you remember, where there was the huge movement of Syrian refugees out of Syria up into Europe.
Okay, so like 2015.
2015.
Yeah.
So that was all over the news.
Yep.
And globally all over the news. It was like everybody was talking about that. And people were talking about Syrian refugees so much that, in fact, a lot of people confused Syrian refugees with refugees. Like there was only one kind of refugee, Syrian refugees, because a lot of people maybe hadn't thought much about refugee until that was in the news. Well, a bunch of the governors around the country all made statements about refugees and whether they would welcome them. And I don't know if you remember, but Asa Hutchinson, this is like in October of 2015, he was over in Japan at some conference or something, and he tweeted and said that he would not welcome Syrian refugees to the state of Arkansas. Well, for one, he can't really say that. States don't have borders,
right,
in the United States, so you
Yeah.
can't exactly do that in the way that he was describing. But it really bugged me when he said that. And part of the reason it bugged me was because I've been historically involved in refugee resettlement for a long time. When we were in Wisconsin, I helped expand refugee resettlement from Milwaukee, where the main center was for Lutheran refugee resettlement, over to Madison, closer to where I lived. So right before I left Wisconsin, we had actually started resettling Bhutanese refugees in Madison. So I already had a little bit of experience of knowing how to help the churches connect with LIRS to then bring refugee resettlement to a new region. Oh yeah. And so then when I got down here, I was interested in doing the same thing, but there was no infrastructure for it. We don't have any Lutheran social service organizations in the state of Arkansas because there's just 20 of our churches in the state. So there's just not that much there. But nevertheless, it had been on my mind. So he tweeted that. You mentioned the news. I did something in social media, and the next day, the TV stations were all like, hey, could we come talk to you? We want to get a statement from a pastor opposing Asa Hutchinson's, tweet. So it's like, okay, that's fine. So I did that. And then we're rolling into Advent, and a good friend and parishioner, Donna Davis, and I were sitting in the fellowship hall after an Advent supper, and we were like, we have to figure out how to do refugee resettlement in Arkansas. And so we started working on that. So we did a couple different things. To make it happen, you have to network in multiple directions. So you have to both figure out how to work with the national agencies while also creating the network of local support for the work that you're going to do. So we started having meetings in December and January, inviting people. So you want to help refugees? Come to a meeting at Good Shepherd. We connected with Catholic Charities because they were the only ones who were doing any kind of resettlement in the state.
Right.
But they were only doing what you call family reconnect. So let's say there's an Afghani family that lives in Little Rock and they've got an uncle who's coming here, then the uncle would go live with them in Little Rock. And so Catholic Charities would help that uncle get there.
Right.
But no new refugee arrivals. So Catholic Charities was getting either all the love or all the hate mail, depending on your political perspective on refugee resettlement. And so he started directing all those to us, and we started making a contact list. And then we called up LIRS, and we were like, we want to bring refugee resettlement to Northwest Arkansas. And LIRS's response was, Arkansas? What? We don't have any connections in Arkansas. And we're like, well, we'll be your connection in Arkansas. And we think we have thousands of people who would support refugee resettlement here. So eventually we convinced them to send a team down, and they came down to do an evaluation of Northwest Arkansas. And when they they literally, when they first arrived, were just like really skeptical, and 3 days later when they left, they were just in love with the place.
Really? What was it about the place that?
Well, what they do when they are evaluating a site is you set up all these meetings with potential stakeholders to help them hear like what kind of resources and support there is in place if refugees were going to arrive. So over the course of 3 days, we had set up meetings with, well, I'll give you some examples that were especially fun. We brought together almost all the ESL teachers in the region for a big meeting at Good Shepherd, like from Rogers and Springdale and Fayetteville. And they all show up and they're like, yes, send us refugees because we already speak 87 languages in Rogers and we've got the resources to, help them out in the
87
schools.
Languages?
There's something like 87 languages that are spoken in. It's a lot.
Yeah.
You don't, okay, it's on a podcast, so it's already quoted, but I could be, but it's a lot.
We get it. Yeah. Nobody's going to hold you to it. So. Clint, I heard it was 82. You were wrong.
You're wrong, yeah. We went to Tyson, and Tyson sat down with us, and they're like, they thought we were going to be bringing refugees like next week. So they're like, we need 200 workers at this plant up in Springdale, and we got this plant up in southern Missouri that needs 150 employees. We're short. When are you going to start, bringing them? We met with the mayor, who was really supportive, and eventually even did like how he does the proclamations. Eventually,
Mayor Jordan.
Mayor Jordan.
Okay, here in Fayetteville. Yeah. You're right. Okay.
Later, we also met with some of the other mayors too, but we started right here in Fayetteville.
Yeah.
We met with a lot of different groups and leaders in the community like that. That we met with the Chamber of Commerce.
Oh.
And Steve at the Chamber of Commerce, well, he was like, he just loved the visitor from LIRS. And so it just made a really great impression. And this is huge. This is something that's really unique about Northwest Arkansas compared to other places where refugees are resettled. A lot of refugees come to big urban areas like Baltimore or Chicago or Des Moines or, places like that. And they don't necessarily get a lot of connection with the local community.
Right.
It's more like they're just resettled by the staff of the social service agency that's doing the resettlement. So it's mostly professional resettlement. And there's nothing wrong with that because you're at least getting refugees out of refugee camps and to a better,
more stable,
economic and stable situation. Yeah. But it's not as personal. It's not as relational. But here, we've got where every single refugee family that arrives in Northwest Arkansas connects with a co-sponsor team from a church. Every single one.
Okay.
And we've been doing that now for 3 years.
So nobody's being left to their own devices to kind of figure out things. I mean, there's a lot of hand-holding involved, and there is an infrastructure there in place to kind of help this process along.
Right. And we also have the staff of Canopy that does the social service work, but then there's this relational connection to a congregation and a co-sponsor team that's pretty unique, and it has to do with our size, and it also has to do with the spirit of the area. There's just a lot of people that volunteer and commit to helping in those ways. So when they saw that kind of commitment, that was huge. We put on an event that year where we had like hundreds of people show up in support of refugee resettlement. And it was so big that the next thing that happened was Asa Hutchinson called us up and it's like, hey, let's meet. And he came to Good Shepherd and we fed him pie and said, we're going to start bringing refugees to Northwest Arkansas.
Yeah.
And he's been pretty supportive.
That's
he
awesome.
kind of made a turn from the kind of political posturing he'd done in the tweet to on the ground. He's been, really helpful for us.
Yeah, that's great. So, I mean, and it's so funny because I've talked to, I know Philip Taldo is a good friend with Governor Hutchinson, and Philip was a guest on this podcast early on and was really kind to me and made some introductions. And, he just told me, he said, listen, I've known this guy for years. He is a good guy. And I think a lot of times we see the public persona of individuals, but then when you kind of scratch below the surface, sometimes you actually find out that, hey, these people are actually legitimate folks. And I know we're in an age, and I try not to make this, I've made I Am Northwest Arkansas non-political for a reason, because we have enough politics stuff to talk about in this country, especially right now, that I want people to be able to let this be, informative and inspiring. And I think when I hear stories like what you've told, I mean, of the first interaction with Governor Hutchinson and then how things ultimately came about, that's very inspiring to me. But it says more, though, in terms of what your experience has been here in Northwest Arkansas. And it's kind of what I've always thought, is that this is a very giving place for an area that is, economically sound. I always tell people, I grew up in northern New Jersey and spent a lot of time in New York City, and I know what old money looks like, but there's a lot of people that have been well established here, but they don't wear it on their sleeves per se, and so I think there seems to be a fair amount of generosity here in Northwest Arkansas, and I just recently became part of the Rotary. Big shout out to the Rotary, the Fayetteville, downtown Fayetteville group. But
you're a downtowner.
I'm a downtowner, yes, and I got kind of thrown into the mix, and I was just blown away by all of the different people that I met. Some retirees, but I mean, just in general, everybody has, what I like to say in the church world, we like to call a servant's heart, and I think that's important. And there are a lot of people out there that have a servant's heart but don't have the direction in terms of where should I go with all this energy and stamina and desire that I have to help people. And I think that's really important. And what you've created at Canopy has created, that's one way to do it. And there are other ways, and you're doing stuff at Good Shepherd. And so I just think that this is a very inspiring place from that standpoint. And I think the upside is tremendous. So I don't know what you think about that.
Well, yeah, I think this is another one of those stats where I'm happy to be corrected, but I heard not too long ago that there's more nonprofits per capita in Northwest Arkansas than anywhere else in the country.
Wow. That one I'll have to check. That would be good.
I wouldn't be surprised for that to be true, because you have an interesting intersection here in Northwest Arkansas of people who are really inspired to give back and who are also into innovation. I mean, the whole living in the backyard of Walmart and Tyson, and then the wider impact that has means that there's just a lot of people who know how to start things, know how to make connections, and then there's a lot of resources, obviously. You got these orgs, some of them backed by the Walmart folks who really help launch new things, like Rope Swing or whatever.
Right.
And then I think that spins off into the impact on nonprofits too. I think that a lot of that money seeds some of the nonprofits. When people come here, they start thinking in that way, even more maybe than they did before they came here. You might have felt small in a big market in some other place, and then you come here and it still has a small town enough feel. It's one of the most bizarre things about this area. I don't quite understand it. Northwest Arkansas is actually, from a numbers perspective, about the same size as Madison or Des Moines.
Right.
But I've lived in Madison, and I go to Des Moines all the time because that's where my wife is from. And there's not that same small town kind of thing where you go to the grocery store and you see 5 people that you know. Come down here, and I'm constantly, like you and I when we went to that event last weekend.
We run into each other in multiple places.
Right.
On a regular basis.
Right. Yeah. Just on one weekend or one evening. And so it feels like you're in a small town with 70,000 people.
Yeah.
I love that.
I do too.
It's great.
Too. Yeah, I can't go anywhere and not run into people that I know. And now that I've been spending more time here locally and not on a plane going somewhere, where my joke was always the gate agents in XNA, and that's the airport here, know me better than a lot of people locally do. Now it's starting to reverse itself, and I'm starting to connect with people here locally, and I see people everywhere, like you say, and I think there's something about that. And I never thought of it that way, because 70,000, that's a lot of people, but I'm always telling folks that you got to watch yourself here, because you always have to be acting right, because you never know who's watching.
Don't do something too embarrassing.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. You don't know who's watching, and
right.
and I'll apologize to anybody now. I'm from the Northeast. I'm from just outside of New York City. My driving habits are a little different than the genteel Southern way of driving. So if you see me ripping around, you just have to understand that it takes a while to train somebody like myself to adjust. But I have adjusted because, like, I've said it before on this podcast, but like, I rarely honk at anybody. Like, I think I've only honked like literally 3 times since I've been here in 5 years.
Right.
Now, when I was living in Boston for 17 years, I laid on the horn all the time. I mean, that's just a normal occurrence. I mean, you're always on the horn. You're always giving people the half of peace sign or whatever. I don't know. But I mean, here it's just different, you know, and you feel like a jerk if you act any other way. So
right.
I think it doesn't work. So
nope.
This has certainly lowered my blood pressure being down here and has caused me just to kind of exhale and take life in a little bit and not be so rushed all the time to do a million different things.
Right.
So that's kind of nice.
But you'd asked about the specifically the church culture here. When we brought the Lutheran Immigration Refugee Service staff here, they're all from the East Coast, like Baltimore area where you're from. And one of the things that they were surprised by, that they couldn't really believe, even though they knew it was like the Bible Belt, was there's literally 7 churches on every corner. And that's not an exaggeration. They thought I was exaggerating when I said that Good Shepherd was on a corner that had 7 churches.
I know. I'm always trying to tell, where does your church end and this other church begin? And if you turn that corner at Rolling Hills and Old Missouri, I mean, it's right. Just like that. But that represents itself in other parts of the city. I mean, you see that.
It's all over.
And Rogers and Springdale and Bentonville, you see the same thing. So, yeah.
Yeah, so if you go down Rolling Hills just a half a mile, you've got the Lutheran Church, and then you've got Christian Science, and then you've got the Cooperative Baptist, Rolling Hills, and then you got Trinity, which is like an evangelical congregation, maybe a little Pentecostal. But then if you turn the corner at Good Shepherd and go up the hill, there's also the Nazarene Church. And in the top of the hill is Fellowship of Champions.
Right.
And then there's 2 other churches there on Old Wire.
Old Wire, yeah.
And everything I just mentioned, that's less than a 1 mile drive.
It's not even half a mile.
No, it's like it's all close together. Well, so they're surprised by that, but then they also expect it to be homogeneous because it's the South. So they are anticipating like primarily evangelical Southern Baptist culture.
Yeah.
And they're not wrong. I mean, Ronnie Floyd is from here, who's now like the head of the Southern Baptist, right?
Yeah.
So they're not wrong that this is like Southern Baptist Central. But what's fascinating about Fayetteville and Northwest Arkansas is the very fast growth of religious diversity in the region.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we did last week was we hosted, this is our 2nd year that we were doing this interfaith youth camp. And we've organized this cooperatively with the synagogue and the Islamic Center, and then the 4th org that we do this with is St. Paul's Episcopal. Good Shepherd Lutheran and St. Paul's Episcopal, we just play really well together. We're in full communion, and we're all they're the clergy. Like I mentioned that I don't have any other ELCA pastors in town.
Right.
So if I go on vacation, they're my on-call people.
I got you.
So we just have that close relationship. But there's a really wonderful synagogue in town, Temple Shalom. On some levels, their experience here is the same as the Lutheran experience. We're both small religious communities where there's no one else, there's no other org.
Right.
So like at Temple Shalom, you're going to meet the whole range of Jews. You're going to meet some people who are way on the liberal side of the spectrum, and you're going to have some that are conservative or Orthodox. Their only option is the one synagogue.
Exactly.
So they have to learn how to play well together under one roof because of this, the size of the community.
Yeah.
And that's the same experience for Lutherans on some levels, and so we identify that way. And then the Islamic Center, which is actually considerably larger than the Lutheran church or the synagogue.
Wow.
If you go down to Friday prayer at the Islamic Center during the school year, there'll be 300 men down on the main floor I can't see the women because they're up in the upper level, so I can't count. But that's much larger than any worship service at our congregation.
Yeah.
And that is just a very high energy and amazing contributor to our community. So we did the camp with them last week, and we've really been growing in our friendship with Islamic Center over the last couple of years. We co-sponsored a refugee that arrived. The Lutheran Church did here this spring. Now we have another team we got a grant. This is actually kind of a fun story. Good Shepherd Lutheran got a grant from Islamic Relief USA.
Oh, wow.
We applied for this grant last year to fund a joint project between the two communities. So we had a speaker come in over the winter, Todd Green, to talk about Islamophobia and how to overcome.
I saw that, yeah.
And that was hosted jointly by the Lutherans and the Muslims. And then now the funds included money for a co-sponsorship team to co-sponsor a refugee family where half the team that's resettling the refugee family is from the Islamic Center and half the team is from Good Shepherd. So it's like a way to both build friendship between the communities and also like serve at the same time. So yeah, you get those kinds of opportunities here, which that I would not have anticipated when I first moved here. Like if you had told me, 8 years ago that I'd be marching in the Pride Parade with 100 people from Good Shepherd on a Saturday and then out doing interfaith camp with the Muslims and the Jews on Monday, I would have been like, in Arkansas?
Right.
But in Arkansas.
Yeah. Now, and I always tell, this slice of the state, Northwest Arkansas, I think is a little unique. I've been to the Delta, I've been to other parts of Arkansas, and Arkansas still has a long way to go. I think it's a beautiful state. I think, to me, Northwest Arkansas is the embodiment of what this whole state could eventually be at some point in time. But I just think, with the university here and everything else going on with the industry, I think it's just a real, the Germans have a word for it. It's called a Schmelztiegel. It's a melting pot. And so Northwest Arkansas is a real melting pot, if you will. And I think that's really interesting. And I think, again, I have to have this conversation with a lot of my friends on the West Coast and back on the East Coast and other places when they say, "You're in Fayetteville? Really?" And I'm like, "Yeah, you just got to come here and see it." It's more than just chicken and, really inexpensive stuff at the grocery store. So, Well,
then the other thing that really, this is the part that annoys me about the attitude that Midwesterners and East Coasters have towards the South is they fail to recognize that they have a lot of those things that they're complaining about that they identify as being Southern right in their own part of the world.
Right.
Like I have a friend who's a lesbian who moved back from Fayetteville to Manhattan, and she has experienced more homophobia from people in Manhattan than she did living in Fayetteville.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my gosh. Wow.
Like people who won't talk to her or will actually call her out on the street because she's walking with her wife or that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Because there's people that are homophobic in New York City.
Yeah.
But New Yorkers think, oh, well, we're this,
No, that's the thing. I think it's interesting. People don't realize, growing up outside of the city, spending a lot of time in the city, New York is very cliquish. And if you don't fall into a certain clique and, when you cross lines, it can be problematic. Whereas here, I think people just take you for face value and just say, hey, unless you prove me wrong, I'm just going to, I'm going to interact with you and be respectful and kind of figure out what's going on with you and not prejudge, if you will.
Right.
Which is what I like. And like I said, I've lived all over, so that's an interesting dynamic.
Well, another example was, if you remember, like a couple years ago when there was the whole hoorah around the Confederate monuments and the Confederate flag.
Yeah.
It was all over the news, and people started putting up Confederate flags in their yards. I saw very few of those in Fayetteville, but then I went home to Iowa to visit family, and I went on a run in Des Moines, Iowa. And during my run, there were 3 different yards flying Confederate flags.
In Iowa?
In Iowa,
yeah.
which is a northern state.
Yeah.
So what's that about? Southern is like apparently, or Confederate thinking as a state of mind as opposed to a regional thing now or something.
I think so, yeah. And I wish I had the time to kind of really unpack that, because it is a much bigger conversation, and certainly one that I would enjoy having. I almost feel like I would have to create another type of podcast for that to really get into that conversation, and because it's and again, I'll leave it at this, but it's a conversation that needs to happen, and it needs to be unpacked, and it needs to be understood from all sides. Mm-hmm. And I think too often we treat it trivially, and we don't give it the time and weight that is required. It's just a quick snap judgment, and that makes me angry. I don't like that. I get it, but it's like, we have to look at the why behind the why, and I think we miss out on that.
For sure. As just one example, in Iowa, I grew up watching Dukes of Hazzard when I was a kid.
I did too.
I never knew there was anything wrong with the Confederate flag.
Yeah, I did too. I had a General Lee car. I had a General Lee Hot Wheels car, and I had a Tyco racing car. So there's been
additional levels of meaning added to that symbol between when I was 13 and now when I'm 47. And so there's a lot of levels to it.
Yeah, it is. So I mean, we could go on and on about that, but man, this is good conversation. So tell me, do you still have these young kids camping out at your church that are staying there for a couple of months?
Yeah.
Can you talk real quickly about that program and what you're doing with them?
Well, so that's a group of AmeriCorps volunteers.
Okay.
There are apparently, I didn't really know this until we made this connection to host them the last couple of years. There's different tracks of AmeriCorps. Mm-hmm. So this group is what they call like Triple C, AmeriCorps Triple C. It's a really hands-on service track. So if you volunteer with this part of AmeriCorps, you're out doing like a lot of physical work. And this team is here with
Appleseeds. It's like the Navy SEALs of AmeriCorps.
Right, yeah. So this team is here with Appleseeds, which is a organization that's right up there on the hill.
We've had them on the show. Yes.
Okay, all right.
Absolutely.
And they applied for a AmeriCorps grant last year and again this year. And then when they host the work, they need a place for the team to stay.
Okay.
And I'm friends with Kira, who's the director of Appleseeds, and so she was looking for a place to stay, and she was like, well, I wonder if Good Shepherd would host, and we were like, sure, why not? So they stay at our church for 3 months, and then they're able to just go right up the hill and go to work every day. And it's fun to host them. They kind of open your eyes to some new ways of thinking about the church space. Mm-hmm. Like you realize how blessed we are, like just with the physical plant that we have. We've got all this room.
Yeah.
In fact, last weekend, not only would we already had AmeriCorps staying there, but we had a youth group coming through that had been up in Wisconsin doing a service trip, and they needed a place to stay overnight on their way back down to Texas. So they stayed at our church too. So we had like 25 people sleeping at the church.
How did they find out about you guys?
How did that group find out about us? Well, we have you can go on the elca.org website, and you can say like, oh, I'm going to be on vacation in
It's like Airbnb Fayetteville. For ELCA almost.
Kind of, but more like you can just find out there's an ELCA church in Fayetteville, which is like halfway between. So then you just call up the church and be like, can I stay at your church?
Yeah.
In this particular case, humorously, the youth director called me up, set all that up, and then between when he set it up and now, they called a new pastor. And the new pastor that church just called was my former intern from Wisconsin.
Oh, wow.
He'd been my intern in Wisconsin, then he was in North Dakota for his first call, and now he's down in Carrollton, Texas.
Man.
So Lutheran is a small world.
A small community, right? Yeah.
I mean, yes and no. We're also the third largest denomination in the U.S., actually, or fourth, something like that.
So
really? Yeah, we have like 4 million members. Oh. So it's like Catholics and then Southern Baptists, and then... So we're pretty big. But when you're talking about ELCA clergy, it just gets to be a tighter network.
Right.
So, yeah, so they really open our eyes on a lot of levels, and I think it's great. I think it's good for the neighborhood. It's always, I think, like safer for a neighborhood for a building to be in use and occupied.
Yeah. So many churches are only used on the weekends, and then, Monday through Friday, they're kind of dormant,
right,
if you will. So, yeah, I think it's something to be said for a church. Even our church, I mean, they're constantly opening the doors during the week at where I go, and trying to make it as available as possible. I
Right.
mean, it's. I think that to me is an effective way of spreading the good news to the community the best way that you can. So
Yeah, we want to be in the neighborhood. That's a really important piece for me. I've always wanted to be the kind of church and the kind of pastor that is connected in good ways right in the local neighborhood.
Yeah.
I spend a lot of time in our neighborhood. I walk around in it and try to know the neighbors and know the neighborhood groups, and I think that's a big deal. Not that all of your membership has to just be from that neighborhood, but that there's always that question that you can ask, like, if your church just disappeared from the map, would anybody notice? And
exactly.
There's a lot of churches that if they disappeared, nobody would notice because they're so clicked in that don't even know who they are.
Yeah.
How they impact the neighborhood.
Yeah, and that's sad because I think the mission for most churches is to be remembered and to make an impact in whatever area you're in. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, that is a challenge. So do you guys think you're gonna? I mean, you've been here almost 10 years now. Do you think you're going to stay here? I mean, what is the thought? I mean, you still have your kids are fairly young still. I mean, they're not graduating from anywhere yet, but. I mean, I think we have a longer term call here. For one, our kids love the schools. Okay.
Our public schools here are just amazing, and our kids have had such a great experience at Butterfield and McNair and Woodland, and so we want to make sure that they get to continue to have that experience.
Right.
But I think on some levels too, even though I've been here I've been at this congregation for 8 years at Good Shepherd, and we've had different kind of stages along the way. But I think that we've got this next stage that I'm really excited about. We survived a big split in 2015. For one,
okay.
We had a group that left the congregation and started another Lutheran church of another denomination in town.
Okay.
And so we've been, for the last few years, that's been part of my ministry, is helping us get, I guess you could say, stable and regrowing after that.
Right.
And so we're in this cool new place. A lot of interesting things came out of that split that have been really good. In fact, I think that part of the reason Canopy exists is because we were free after the split to do and commit to stuff that we wouldn't have been able to do before.
Right.
The little free pantry started after that.
Mm-hmm.
There's this joke that I heard from a bishop one time. He said two bishops met, and the one bishop said to the other bishop, "So have you started any new congregations in your synod?" And the bishop said, "Well, not on purpose." And I think there's a lot of truth to that. I moved here with this vision in my mind of what I was supposed to do. This other thing happened.
Yeah.
And that's the way God works sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's the beauty of it, and you have to kind of be open to whatever is going to happen and be able to kind of roll with it, if you will. And I think you've done a really good job of that. I would certainly, I know I enjoy reading your writing quite a bit, especially on your Facebook posts, but I know you've written some articles in some of the local newspapers, and I would encourage our listeners just to kind of check out your thought process and some of the things that you're processing as a local pastor and as a member of this community, in terms of what you want to see this community ultimately become. And I think everybody that's here has an idea of what they want this community to become, but not everybody's able to kind of voice that. And so you have a platform. So I would certainly encourage you to continue to do that and share all of the good news and the insight and ideas that you have, because I think that's important, and that's what makes Northwest Arkansas special, I think. So but I really appreciate you coming on, and I could go on, and we're already 50 minutes in. I think it's I don't know if it's not this podcast won't be 50 minutes long, but I mean, it's definitely, this will be a nice run for somebody to listen to this particular episode. And so I really, Clint, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast. Before we let you go though, I have to ask you a couple of things that we ask a lot of our guests. And one is when you're not sitting at your wife's dining room table enjoying a good meal from her, where do you like to go eat here in Northwest Arkansas?
My favorite place is KJ's Korean barbecue.
Oh, yeah, I love KJ's.
Yeah.
KJ's is good. They're bulgogi, and they've got some good food there.
Uh-huh.
And I love the kimchi. So
yeah,
absolutely.
I just had a meeting. We're in the process of developing a new sanctuary network for Northwest Arkansas, which would be like providing sanctuary for immigrants in congregations. And our leadership team for that, I took them all out to KJ's on Tuesday night.
I didn't get my invitation, man. No, I'm just kidding. I love KJ's. That's actually, yeah, that's good.
And we know the owners. And so, like, when we go there, they always come out with extra, like, free hors d'oeuvres and stuff like that.
Right.
It's my favorite.
Yeah, KJ's is right on North College, just right below like Lewis Ford, and like right before you get to the Whole Foods if you're going towards the bypass on College. And so definitely would. And this is you're the first person that has recommended KJ's on the podcast. So we'll be good. We'll be
cool.
I'll be glad to tag them, because what we're doing is also creating a kind of a tag of all of the favorite places of people that are on the show. I think right now The Preacher's Son is the number one choice.
People are always recommending that one.
Always. I mean, Matt Cooper, I don't know what he's serving up there, but everybody and their mother to a person is like, oh, The Preacher's Son, it's the best. So, and Heirloom is another one. Heirloom is in Rogers, and that's an interesting place. And we're going to actually on the podcast get up there and check out both of those locations very soon and have those chefs on the podcast to kind of talk about their inspiration and what they see here in the cuisine of Northwest Arkansas. So that would be interesting.
Well, there's good places up there. It's just I've got to probably have a small Fayetteville bias, so I'm probably only going to Fayetteville.
You know, and that's so funny because I know there are some people that kind of stay Fayetteville center, but then there are other people that branch out. And, you know, being from the Northeast, I'm like, it's not really that far away, you know, to go up to Bentonville or to go to Springdale to go to Rogers. But you talk to some people, it's like, man, going to Bentonville, you might as well pack a lunch because that's a road trip. And I'm like, it's really not that far away.
It's not that far, no.
It's not that far.
No, we just ate at a really good crepe place up there the other day in Bentonville.
Yeah, there is a place up there. And
it's amazing.
Not at the 8th Street Market, right?
Well, it's just down the road. It's on 8th Street. It's over there. It's a little French place. It's super good. But my other favorite restaurant probably in Fayetteville is Meiji.
Okay. All right.
They do, especially if you go on a Friday night. Well, okay, so at KJ's, you got to try the dukboki if you haven't had that yet. That's my favorite thing there. At Meiji, go on a Friday night and get oysters.
Yes.
They bring in fresh oysters on Friday nights.
And also get the hamachi kama. The grilled yellowtail neck at Meiji's is amazing.
Yeah.
So, and I'm always impressed because their preparation of it is actually really good. And, you know, the fact that Meiji's is actually right around the corner from both of us is just, it's nice to have a sushi spot that close to your house that you can go to. And it's like, wow, this is actually really good.
Right.
So, yeah. And that's in the Signature Bank Plaza there at the corner of Joyce and 265, or otherwise known as Crossover. So definitely you can check out Meiji's and certainly go visit KJ's Korean Barbecue and tell them that Pastor Clint sent you, and maybe you'll get some extra items on your plate too. So you know, and that would be good. But and then so finally, what do you recreationally? What do you guys like to do? What have you experienced here where you're like, wow, I had no idea? Like for instance, one of the guests talked about how much they love the Buffalo River. I mean, it is a treasure. I get it, but they were like, no, you don't understand. The Buffalo River is really amazing. But do you have something here that really resonates with you and you like experiencing it?
Well, a lot of different things. I'm a gamer, so we love we're pretty connected to some of the gaming culture at some of the game stores in the area.
Otherwise known as RPG, role-playing games.
Yeah, role-playing games, right. And so especially Gear, which is over there by Arcadia.
Okay.
And Bears by the Mall, which is in Johnson.
Okay.
And the recent one that we just played board games at for Father's Day is Game Exchange up in Springdale, which is a really cool place. So that's one big one. But in terms of outdoor recreation, probably the place where we spend the most time is simply over at Mount Kessler.
Yeah.
Because our kids are all into soccer.
Yeah.
And that's a great place. I love it.
You got the baseball fields. You got the soccer fields. The Rotary just put in that new playground. You've got the trails.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you've got everything. So
it's really great.
Have you ever ridden your bike down there from your house?
I've never ridden the whole way. No, I haven't.
It's a long way, but it's a nice ride. It's definitely a nice ride.
Yeah.
And the thing about it is, you're literally from where you live, which is right where at the foot of the Raven Trail. You can ride that all the way around and connect down to Mount Kessler, which is kind of cool. So
yeah, I'm more of a runner, so I run that Mud Creek Trail.
Yeah,
a lot. And of course, I love my main running route is around Lake Fayetteville, because that's close enough. I can run up to it and around it and back.
And that's really nice too. I would really recommend it. I don't know how long those trails are, but it kind of weaves back and forth. It's really nice.
It's 5.6 miles around Lake Fayetteville.
Okay.
And then from our neighborhood, it adds another 4 miles altogether.
Wow. So you can get almost 10 miles in.
Yeah.
Wow, that's cool. Okay.
And if you go up north on the north edge of Lake Fayetteville now, because they've got all that whole bike path now extended from downtown Fayetteville, it links up on the northwest corner of Lake Fayetteville, and then you can hop on that trail and go north, which will take you right up into downtown Springdale.
Right, because you can cross Don Tyson, and that road there's like a kind of protected bikeway there. Right. So which is really nice.
Yeah. So when I was training for the half marathon, I would add just running right up past the airport, the Springdale Airport, and to the downtown.
Well, that's right, because you did the Hog Eye, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's right. I remember you posting about that. So, okay. Well, there you have it, folks. He doesn't just preach, he also runs, and he eats Korean barbecue. So, Clint, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast and just kind of sharing with our audience. And like I said, I'm glad I chose you to be the first man of the cloth that I had on this podcast, and just I knew you had a very interesting story to tell, and for somebody that kind of ended up here in an unusual way, being here and kind of digging in and trying to make a difference, it speaks volumes of your character and what's what moves you. So thank you so much for being a part of this community. I really appreciate it. So
absolutely,
yeah.
The first joke I learned when I moved here?
What's that? What's
the difference between a Yankee and a damn Yankee?
What?
A damn Yankee stays.
I like that one. Okay. I'm going to have to post that joke. That's funny. A damn Yankee stays. So, that's hilarious. That's hilarious. All right. Well, folks, on that note, that's how we're going to end this podcast. Thanks so much for Clint Schnekloth. For coming on the podcast. We really appreciate it, and just a really interesting individual. I hope that you enjoyed this episode of I Am Northwest Arkansas. We will be back with you next week with another episode featuring hopefully somebody like Clint that's exciting and interesting and vibrant and has something to add to the conversation of what makes Northwest Arkansas great, the intersection of business, culture, entrepreneurship, and life here in the Ozarks. So we really appreciate you. If you get a chance, please check us out online at IamNorthwestArkansas.com, and also wherever you listen to this podcast, please rate and review us. We would love a 5-star review. Let us know what you think about the podcast. We're getting some really great reviews, and I'm actually going to start reading those reviews here on the podcast just to highlight what people are saying about us, and we really appreciate that. But if you get a chance, we'd love for you to do that, whether you're listening to it on Spotify or Apple Podcast or wherever you find your great podcast. You can rate us and review us and let us know what you think about this. And if we'd love to hear from you. So you can always reach out to me at any time, Randy at IamNorthwestArkansas.com. I'm actually starting to get emails now from different people, and I just got an email from the symphony out of the blue, and they want to be on the podcast, and I'm going to accommodate them. We're going to have some of the director of the symphony and some other folks on the podcast to kind of talk about classical music here in Northwest Arkansas, because we do other things and play banjos in Northwest Arkansas. I'm being funny, but anyway, it should be cool. So we'll see how that goes, and hopefully in a few weeks you guys will hear from the symphony. Their upcoming season is going to be happening, and hopefully we'll get a chance to talk about it. And we also got invited to Bite NWA. And so I will be at Bite NWA over the next couple of days, and I'm going to cover that event and interview all the people that are there, and I'll probably package that up and make that an episode as well. So stay tuned. A lot of really great things happening on I Am Northwest Arkansas. That's it for today. I'm your host, Randy Wilburn, and I will see you next week.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of I Am Northwest Arkansas. Check us out each and every week, available anywhere that great podcasts can be found. For show notes or more information on becoming a guest, visit IamNorthwestArkansas.com. We'll see you next week on I Am Northwest Arkansas.